Hello everyone and welcome to today's Kids Matter Early Childhood webinar, Children's Behaviour, Sharing What We Learn with Families. This is the second webinar in our Children's Behaviour series. And welcome if it is your first time at a Kids Matter webinar, but also welcome back to anyone who's attended previous events. It is great to have you back. Kids Matter Early Childhood is founded by the Department of Health and Beyond Blue, and it continues to grow and develop through strong partnerships between Beyond Blue, the Australian Psychological Society and Early Childhood Australia. But I would also like to take a moment to acknowledge the part you, our participating early childhood services and our online learning community play in bringing Kids Matter Early Childhood to life. It's your participation, your interest, your Kids Matter actions and practice stories, and your commitment to growing healthy minds that are all essential to the initiative and ultimately the wellbeing of children and families. Today, Kids Matter facilitator Michelle Scott is returning, and together we will be building on from the last webinar, where we discussed how to observe children's behaviour using the Beatles observation chart. We will do this by exploring the subject of sharing our understanding and observations of children's behaviour with families. We will discuss tips for successful meetings, touch on potential obstacles we need to be aware of, and consider how sharing what we observe with families can contribute to better outcomes for children, families and educators. So thank you everyone who's participated in the chat so far too for helping us finish the sentence, sharing with families. I would also like to take a moment to acknowledge the Wangara land and pay my respects to the traditional custodians of this land. I would also like to extend this acknowledgement to the traditional custodians of the many lands that we're all meeting on today. Please join with me and pay respect to elders past, present and future. Today hold and share the culture, traditions, memories and hopes of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. As a way of undertaking your own acknowledgement of the land you're on, I invite you to write the name of the country you are in the chat to the left of your screen. There was something I saw on Facebook the other day as well, and I know Facebook, some people might be into it, some people might not, but there was something where people were considering the importance of acknowledging the land that we grew up on as well. And for me, the land I grew up on and I was able to learn and grow and play was Marangerry land. So that was something that I've been reflecting on this week and the importance that that had to me. So welcome back, Michelle. She'll be popping on screen shortly and I will be handing over to her in just a moment. Are you there, Michelle? Yes, hello.
How are you? Thank you. Hi, good. How are you?
Good, thank you. Good to have you back. But before we begin and I hand over to you, I just wanted to discuss a few key points about today's webinar. Today, we would love everyone to participate and contribute to the conversation that we have. There will be polls that will be asking for your questions and your opinions about two important questions. There will also be an opportunity to contribute on the Shared Thinking blog like we have done previously in the past. And yes, there is Facebook and Twitter too, will be there if people are interested in connecting that way. I'd just like to remind you that if you do click on any of the links that are on the slides throughout the webinar, it will open up a new tab in your website browser. So you won't lose us. You just need to click on a tab to get back to us or click on a tab to go to the page that you would like to go. Lots of people actually click on the tab and save those tabs for later to go and look at afterwards. So at the moment, please feel free to use the chat to the left of your screen as much or as little as you like. Pop any questions you have in there as well and we will try to respond to them today or some way in the future through Facebook, blog or our Twitter feed. Also, just that little reminder that your chat isn't your thing. You can minimise it by clicking the little triangle to the right of the chat column. How you participate is entirely up to you, but we do ask that you do so in ways that keep yourself and other people safe and also respect the privacy and confidentiality of your families, your children and yourself. Because self-care, that is important too. In our work with children and families, we hear stories and witness or experience times that are stressful and they can all leave us with questions or facing difficult or uncomfortable emotions or thoughts. So given today's topics that we will be exploring, this webinar might trigger some difficult feelings or thoughts for you. So before we begin, please take a moment to plan what you will do if you do experience these thoughts and feelings. We'll also be having a few moments throughout the webinar just for everyone to touch base and check in on how they're feeling. You can access more information about self-care and keeping safe on the links that we've got up on your screen. The last link takes you to a podcast, which we'll be listening to a little bit later, that's been developed by a group of people who are participating in the Kids Matter Early Childhood Service as well. So without any further delay, I'm going to hand over to you, Michelle, and we'll get right into sharing our observations with families. Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks, Amelia. So in our last webinar, we discussed ways of observing children so that we might get a meaningful information. And we demonstrated how the Beatles chart can be used to get a holistic picture of what's going on for a child, and also how the educators can use it as a reflective tool. It can be useful as a reflective tool on many levels, so when we're concerned about a child's well-being, or even those times when we as educators are finding it more challenging than usual to create positive connections. Sometimes after trying different things to connect that just don't seem to work, it can be frustrating. But before assuming that nothing will work, the Beatles observation tool might actually give you some increased insight into what could be happening for the child. And it might be that the child hasn't yet learned how to connect with others. They might also still be learning the importance of giving good social feedback to others, and they don't realise that this is important in relationships. So for instance, in this situation, we might try to cheerfully guide the child. When I smile and say hello, I love to see you smile back and say hello too. So ultimately, the observation chart can support us to be open-minded to the possibility of love and compassion and having the power to change situations and relationships. But reflecting on this in this way can also reduce any temptation to think negatively about the child or consider them impossible to connect with. And these are both attitudes that may lead to further stress for ourselves as educators. And there's lots of research to show that having compassion for others and believing in the best intentions of people can lead to very positive mental health for ourselves. With this in mind, with this mindset, we may just be the person a child or family needs to meet to develop the essential relational skills that they require. So the Beatles observation chart can also act as a framework for having a meeting with families to discuss your observations, particularly when you're concerned. And this will be our main focus today. It's always important to share what we observe about children with the family. And there are many benefits to sharing positive observations relating to child's daily experiences and learning. And there are also times when our observations cause us concern, and it can be tricky to know exactly how concerned to be. So families can often grapple with this question too. And this slide shows the many factors that can influence mental health and lead to an educator having concern about the mental health of a child or a family member. If you or your family want more information about what behaviours can indicate concerns for a child's mental health, then the resource on this slide is called Should I Could Be Concerned, and it lists behaviours to look for and options for supporting the family. So you can click on the link in the chat or on the slide to access this information. It may open up into a new tab on your browser, and you can look at it after the webinar. So it's good to know that we don't need to be the experts in assessing or coming up with the strategies to support all the circumstances we're going to find. However, our skills will be utilised well if we can recognise when a family or a child may benefit from the professional support for a difficulty they may be facing, and if we have the skills to link the families to those services. The key skills that we need to do this are relationship building skills. We need to build secure relationships with families so that we can have open communication with them. And it will be helpful to build good relationships with some key service providers in your community so you can help that family to link in smoothly with the service, as well as implement any strategies within your service that they may be suggesting. So does this mean that we will always be referring to other professionals outside our service? Absolutely not. As any of our registered Kids Matter services know, there are many things that we do in our own professional interactions with children and families that support mental health. Many of them are spoken about in our last webinar. But what we can do to support the healthy growth and development of children as well as supporting those facing challenges, but sometimes we need to utilise other skills to help families to move into more specialised support if their challenges outside our scope, and this is what we're going to be talking about more today as well. So once we have some useful observations, what do we do with them? And how do we know when to seek professional help? Well, knowing when to seek professional help will be considered carefully by all educators. And there's no blanket way to decide, and we must take into consideration the different factors that we might need to juggle whilst seeking support for a child or family. As mentioned, in the Beadle chart, generally we consider the following factors when deciding whether to seek help. The persistence. Is the challenge persistent? Has it been happening for quite some time? The pervasiveness, with who, where and when does the behaviour occur? Is it across multiple settings? And if the educators or parents are concerned, then seeking help can be very beneficial to the child. And how much of the child's life does it concern? Is it mild, moderate, severe? Depending on the concern will depend on how long you may wait to seek help, and whether the parents are open to seeking support will also be a factor. So we'll use some observations to gather some information, and we'll use our relationship skills with the family of a child to perhaps open up conversations with the family and find out if this is a concern for them too. Have they noticed this at home, or is it something that only happens within the childcare setting? So I guess we're going to do a poll now, and we're going to think about what you think it is that is the biggest factor that makes people resistant to seeking. Sorry, my notes have gone. Amelia, I'll let you.
Sorry about that, Michelle. I was
That's
being
okay.
patient, wasn't I?
That's okay.
I'll up right now for everyone. So what do you think is the biggest obstacle to families seeking support? So this is a multiple choice question, so you can answer more than one, but if you can really try hard to think of the one top thing that you think, that would be fantastic. And if there's something else, let us know in the chat what you're thinking around what those obstacles could be, because it's important to consider obstacles. And I understand, Michelle, that I think we'll be exploring this a little bit further towards the end of the webinar as well. So yeah. I'll just give you a little bit of an update, Michelle, about what's been happening in the chat. Lots of people from all over Australia are here, and there's been acknowledgement of many different lands and countries that we're all on. There's also been some people that have finished our sentence for us, and a lot of the sentences, they relate to how it can support children's learning and development, but also their well-being. People have said that they've used the Beatles tool as well to actually take information to families. So it's great to see it's out there and working. So I'm just going to stop the poll, and everyone can see the results. So for our participants today, it's a bit of a tie between the fear of a label or a diagnosis, or families potentially not being aware that the child might need help. And there's been a few things popped in the poll as well. Yes, all of them can have an impact, which is one thing that has been popped in. There's reference to parents' grief and loss around the process of getting support for the child and their feelings around that. There's also mention of fear of judgment as a parent. And there's been some mention about how sometimes we can get into that notion of trying to attribute blame to situations rather than looking from that strength-based perspective, which is what I think is, we're going to cover a lot of that today. We will, yeah. We're going to hand back over to you now and to move on to see what happens next.
Thanks, Amelia. So what are some of the steps that you can take as a service to prepare for having a potentially tricky conversation with families about their child? Well, the 2015 report on the Second Australian Child and Adolescent Survey of Mental Health and Wellbeing, that's quite a mouthful, estimates that 1 in 7 children aged between 4 and 17 need support. and that 25% of those needing support had their needs unmet or received less support than they felt they needed. So here are some tips from some of the services that we've been talking to on how you can prepare to support more than 3/4 of children needing help. And this commences from the very beginning of your relationship with each family. So one of the tips is to name it from the beginning. Some services place a positive statement in their enrolment pack, letting families know the value of identifying children early in their life if they're showing signs that they may benefit from some extra support. So they let families know that their child may be one of the many that come through the service that may benefit from being linked to another service in the community or to external support if the family wants it. Many educators can tell within a day or so if a new child might be presenting behaviours that warrant a closer look. So when an educator notices this, they often take their time to observe and they let the child adjust to their new environment before forming an opinion or mentioning this to parents. However, they also go about intentionally forming a positive connection and collaborating with the family so that if they do have to have that tricky conversation down the track, the family will hopefully feel safer, more supported, and are able to open up about any challenges that they feel and share their own knowledge about their child, which is very important. So another tip is being honest from the beginning in a strengths-based way. So it can be difficult for parents to hear that their child has difficulties, and it can be made even worse if people have been telling them for weeks that their child is having great days and suddenly they find out that their child has been having challenges that are of a concern. So most parents are concerned with how their child is settling in and they want to know if there are difficulties. And when this is delayed, then parents may feel that their trust has been broken. There are sensitive ways to share this information, and it's important that it is done respectfully. One method that is a little bit easy to remember is we think of it as a sandwich, and we start with a positive comment, and we sorry, my notes have just gone a little bit. Yeah, so it's called a sandwich method. We start with a positive comment, then we present the potentially challenging information in between, and we finish with a positive comment. Amelia, can you please share an example of what this might look like?
Sure. Okay, so we could have a situation where we meet with a parent at the end of the day when they're collecting their child, and this is an example of that. William had a lot of fun playing with the trucks in the sandpit today. He seems to really like playing with one particular truck. We're helping to support William in taking turns with the truck because he has at times been very upset when it came to the time of someone else having a go. We did this by using a sand timer, so it was really concrete and visual for William to see when his turn was up and when his turn was coming again. William also sat with us this afternoon to listen to a story. He loved pointing to all the pictures, especially the truck ones.
Thanks, Amelia. So I guess, this kind of communication can build trusting relationships because it's largely positive. It shows the carer that you're interested in their child, and it shows them how you are supporting their development, which may give them some ideas to try at home or open up a conversation about where they're at, and so they can share their own concerns with you. It may also plant a seed of thought that if the carer hadn't considered that there was a concern before, but without jumping to any conclusions too early. And this way, if you are still concerned in a few weeks' time, it won't be as big a shock to the carer as they've had time to think about what you have mentioned before. So positive relationships can be formed with carers more easily when they get a sense that you genuinely care for their child. So if you're finding this difficult, try to ask others what they like about the child's strengths and try putting yourself in the child's shoes. And not taking things too personally. If you can ask for information from the parents. Parents are the real experts when it comes to their child. They have lots of information about how their child is in many different contexts, but sometimes they don't realise how helpful it can be to share this information with you. So by remaining curious when you're talking to them and asking questions about their perspective, then we're respecting their importance and we're opening up conversations that may help you to work together for the child's benefit and help the parent to feel secure and supported. So what are some of the steps that, a thorough understanding of age-appropriate child development is the key to many of us already knowing when something in a child's development might need attention. So as we're not experts at diagnosing the conditions, but we do have a good general idea of when something might not be quite right, it's good to listen to your gut feeling and follow the options for referral and support that are appropriate for the situation. It might be that a professional can set your mind at ease and say that no action is needed at this time, or it may also be that the situation can be monitored for a little longer and minimal support given. Or it might even be that some big steps can be taken immediately to support the child and or family and link them to the support that they need. But it can be useful to note that many support services in the community can have waiting lists. So the earlier that you can address the issues once a family is open to seeking support, the better. Either way, early childhood services can be that supportive relationship that families can turn to as they are forming new relationships with support services. And this can be quite daunting for families. And some families may need to seek the support of multiple services, and you might be that one constant friendly face that they can come to for support as they're navigating the many services. And you might also be able to provide some useful observations or intimations to the professionals that they're working with. And this may help families to communicate the issues to the professionals and give them an idea of what is happening for the child across multiple settings. And further to that, you might also be able to implement the strategies and suggestions made by professionals to support the child while they're attending your service.
Michelle, I've come back.
Sorry. So when you get to the stage of having enough information collected, it's good to plan about how you're going to approach the family with that and what will make them feel the most comfortable. So these are the 8 key factors to consider. Which one is the first one, Amelia?
The first one that we've listed is using the Beatles observation chart, because it's a great place to record your observations, but it's also a place that can guide, it's a tool basically to guide your discussions when you're explaining your observations to people. And that could be family members, it could also be people from the community organisations you've just been speaking with. And using the Beatles observation chart really will just make the next 7 steps a lot smoother, I think.
Yeah. Thanks, Amelia. I've got also consider the timing of the meeting. So it might be best to ask the family to meet ahead of time to allow them to make space for their calendar to give you their full attention. So if parents are waiting to go to work or pick up other children and get dinner in the evenings, you won't really have their full attention.
Exactly. And that links in really closely to considering the setting and the atmosphere. You need to think about where families will feel most comfortable. Will it be yarning under a big tree in the playground or in a private space with a box of tissues and a cup of tea? It's also around, with the setting and the atmosphere, considering whether or not they'll have other children that need to be supported and cared for while you're having the conversation, particularly if they're below school age. So will there be a space for them to play while you have those conversations?
Yeah. And then we need to consider culture. Are there cultural perspectives to consider? So will you sitting in front of them with a clipboard of information set up an uncomfortable dynamic that you are the expert? Or perhaps a less formal chat will work better for some families. And even perhaps having a folder of carefully prepared observations and written information will be better for other families. You just need to use your relationship skills and your knowledge of the family to decide what you think is going to be best for them.
Definitely, and considering culture is essential in making space and the time safe. But it's also important in determining whether or not we should be concerned about a child's wellbeing as well. Yeah. Mental health really does need to be considered within a child's context, and culture is part of that.
Yeah. Another tip is to do your research beforehand. It really can take a lot of preparation for families to seek help. And all that effort can be easily undone if you refer a family to a service that's not suitable, or the family can't access them physically due to transport limitations, something like that. So it's helpful to note that some services can only work with families of a certain demographic. For instance, they might need to live within a certain geographic area, or they might need to meet income requirements or have a formal diagnosis to access the service. So a quick phone call or a check of their website before your meeting to see whether the service would be a good fit for the family is probably a good idea. And you might also be able to link with the professional so that you can collaborate together to provide the best support.
Definitely, and doing your research, that sort of goes hand in hand with considering your main points beforehand as well. So it's important to have your main points in your head, especially if you're not going to be using notes during a meeting and not wanting to arrive with a clipboard in that sort of situation. So it's good to have your main points you want to discuss, also any key questions that you'd like to ask of the family beforehand as well. And sometimes rehearsing can be a really good strategy to use as well. So when you're rehearsing, you can think about what you want to say, but also consider how you could potentially handle any sort of responses that could be a bit tricky. One thing as well, and I think by the end of this slide, people are really going to get the sense that I like the Beatles observation chart, but I think it could be a really good useful thing to have a blank or summarised version of the Beatles chart with you as well. And that could be something that you could use to jot any notes or stick to key points during the meeting.
Yeah. And I guess the Beatles chart also helps us with the next one in the area, which is considering strengths-based language. So before your meeting, trying to think about how you're going to frame what you need to say, and having a strengths-based perspective means that your language and your attitude emphasises a person's strengths and their own self-determination. And you're likely to see them as being resilient, resourceful, and capable of making choices that are really good for their own family in the face of what they're dealing with.
It's very important, and it's very powerful and very empowering. And that's our next point, is around empowering families to be able to decide the pace that we're going down this track, this journey of supporting their child, helping them to have control of those reins in a sense. And while you've done your research beforehand about supporting the family during the meeting, it's best that they are able to come up with a decision to decide what's best for them as a family together. You can even assist, and again I'm going to say that Beatles observation chart again, you can actually sit down together as a group and assist them in completing the form as well, and that could help support any decision-making processes. Having a common task where you're sitting down side by side completing something like that can actually provide a focus and keep the conversation positive and solution focused as well, and on track. Do you have anything to add about empowering families, Michelle?
Yeah, thanks. I think that it's really important to consider that they may need time to process what you're saying, and offering a specific service might even be too much in the first meeting. You might just gently let them know that when they're ready, you have some ideas for options if you'd like to talk about it. So another idea is to take notes during or after the meeting to record what was said and decided for your future reference. And having those options available is important if you want to avoid what one mother reflected, which was that she said that her son had learning difficulties, and when the teachers brought the difficulties to her, she would make her feel that she had to fix him, and that she wasn't offered any ideas on how to support him or where to go for help. So, sometimes families will have a wide range of responses to your information, and it might not be about you or how you delivered the information. But by following the steps that was mentioned here today, you can provide the best opportunity for a positive outcome.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Michelle. Now, this is an opportunity. We've given you 8 tips as an audience, but this is an opportunity for everyone else to consider what is an essential step that you take to prepare for meetings that are supportive with families. So if you click on the link, everyone in the audience, that says click here to answer, you'll be taken straight to our blog post. It'll open up in another tab, so you'll have to click on that. So we invite you now to pop on over to our blog and share with our online learning community exactly what is an essential step in your view that you need to make these meetings the most successful and positive ones that we can have. So while people are doing that, we'll just give people a bit of a moment to click on and head over that way. I've sent a few comments through to you, Michelle, that we could maybe touch base on. So Lorraine, she's mentioned that it takes time and support so families know that they can make the final decision. So that notion of the space and the time is really important to keep in mind. And sometimes while we as educators, while we've had moments to reflect and consider the concerns, those sort of things. For some families, this might be the first time they're getting that information. Yeah. So it's about being able to process that. Someone's also mentioned that one of the obstacles can be a belief that children will grow out of a concern, so there might not need to be an action. Have you had a chance to have a look at any of these? Because I'm happy to just keep talking all day, you know what I'm like, but if there's anything you'd like to say.
Yeah. No, I really like what Emma B said, which is asking for families' input to an agenda. I think when you're having a meeting, you know, it's always going to be the most respectful to give them, you know, as much control of how the outcome of that meeting can happen as possible. I think it's respectful and it's showing real collaboration. So happen as possible. It's respectful and it's showing real collaboration. So, yeah.
And one final thing before we move on, there was one mention around sometimes it's also thinking that a child needs to overcome the problems themselves, and that can be a very real attitude that is out there, and ultimately with any sort of issue, we want to be able to have children skilled so that they know when they need help, they know when they can resolve things themselves. Now, that's all part of the learning process, but I definitely agree that sometimes there can be assumptions that children should maybe be there before they're really ready to be there at that stage.
Yeah, giving them time to be on their own individual learning track, but still supporting if they're really needing it, and that's a professional call that will be different in every circumstance.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm going to hand over to you, and while you're having a chat, I might duck over to the blog to see what people have written. But I think you're going to have a little bit of a look about what happens, what can potentially happen when families are first approached with the concerns from an educator about their child's wellbeing or their development when they're ready. So I'll hand back over to you, and I'll see you soon.
Thanks, Amelia. So we have touched on it already, and people have mentioned it in the chat, that when families are presented with this kind of information, depending what it is, they might be going through grief, or they might also be going through grief for a situation that they're facing personally. And many of you will be aware of the work by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, explaining how we process through these different stages of grief. And they're listed on the slide before you. So it's important to interpret the stages loosely and to expect much individual variation. So there's no neat progression from one stage to the next. But in reality, there is much looping back, and the stages can hit at the same time, or they can occur out of order, and we can remain in them for different lengths of time. But despite this, for being aware of the stages, we can just provide a really good general guide of what to expect. So during the process of coming to terms with challenges, loss, tragedy, or diagnosis, family members can experience real grief. And I've heard some educators recognise in their families, we've talked to them about their child, but they're in denial that anything is going on. And this is actually perhaps very true, because when we get distressing news, often the first thing that happens is that we deny it. We can't believe it, or we minimise it. There must be a mistake. Surely it's not that bad, or it's just because of the stage, or something like that. And this is a very real part of working through grief. And it's important for educators to be aware of what families may be facing, so that you can have those tricky conversations in a respectful and helpful way. I guess they don't always tell you exactly what's going on in their life, so even just being aware that it could be a possibility that something's going on, you know, just it helps you to have that little bit of compassion for them. So another stage of grief is anger, and anger can show up in having a shorter fuse or letting small things seem bigger than usual, or having a larger than usual outburst of emotion. And sometimes people look for anything or anyone to blame, and it possibly could be that it's you. So as difficult as it is, it's really important to try to stay connected to the parent and to listen to them if they want to talk, but not to try to take it personally if you've reflected that this is about the grief. It's important to keep yourself safe, both physically and emotionally. So there might even be a time when you might need to say to a parent, I can see you're very frustrated right now, but I will talk to you about this when you aren't yelling at me. Educators may need some extra support to manage these sort of situations, or a debriefing afterwards. So another thing that can happen is sadness or depression, and it's part of the stages of grief. It may be apparent when carers find it hard to get their child to preschool in the morning, or they may be quieter or teary or less engaging, and they may seem in a daze or absent-minded or not functioning in their usual way. And you can offer support by showing kindness, by talking calmly. If possible, offer a cup of tea and a quiet sit down or a chat if you have the time and place. You can also display options for support around your service. So having a Kids Matter display of posters and information sheets allows parents to know that you're comfortable talking about mental health and you have the information to share if they want it. Having the materials printed out and available also allows people, if they prefer, to gather that information without needing to open up to you about it in the first instance. And once a person comes to acceptance, which is often the last stage of grief that we talk about, their life is generally adapted to the difficult circumstances that led to the grief. But it won't always mean that everything is better, because some experiences last a lifetime. It just means that the life is a little bit better able to get to function, and there's maybe longer times between revisiting the sadness and other feelings that go with processing the loss. So I'd like to share this quote with you to keep in mind when supporting grieving families. It says, always be kinder than necessary, because everyone you meet is fighting some kind of a battle. And I just think that's a really great quote to keep in mind. And the quote on the next slide is also something that's worth considering. So Kids Matter have a great resource that you can follow the link on the slide to save it for later. And it's a table that gives you ideas about what you might do or think about if you're sensing that there are communication barriers with you and the family. So there's lots of suggestions for families what they might do as well. So if you want to give it out to families and encourage them to communicate with you, it can easily be shared on Facebook or in a newsletter or given out in enrolment packs. The subject of seeking a diagnosis can be controversial, and it can evoke really strong feelings. And the feelings are usually connected with our desires to act in the ways that are seen as being in the best interest of a child. And sometimes there are differences in what individuals deem to be the child's best interest. So it's important that we're aware of how we are feeling and also respectful of how others might have a different perspective of those situations. But talking this through can actually help us in working within those differences, and it can even open our eyes to new possibilities. Sometimes families can also experience feelings connected with both the pros or the cons of having a diagnosis. And to give you an idea of what some of parents may feel like when they have a child with a disability, I'd just like to read you a quote from one mum. But before I do that, the slide that you're looking at now, a lot of those come from a part of our component 4, and it is on page 67. So you can click that link and later look up the rest of the resources around the pros and cons of a diagnosis. So here's the quote of what one mum said, named Belinda. Even though I knew from a very young age that something wasn't quite right, the diagnosis of autism hit me in the gut. I cried for days. I grieved deeply for the future that was now so different from how I had imagined it. In the middle of this, I had to try to explain this to my relatives and friends, and I didn't have the words. I also had to get support for her needs. It was extremely hard, but then some positive things happened too. I finally understood why my child did certain things, and I learned ways to connect with her. I felt validated that my frustrations were real and had a reason. It wasn't just that I was a bad parent, which is what I had come to believe. I met some amazing parents who understood and who I could finally take my child to play with and didn't need to explain her different behaviour or feel judged by those parents. And I got reconnected with a group of parents who understood, and they had lots of great ideas to share with me.
Thanks, Michelle. And that quote that you read, that just sums up everything and all the mixed feelings that families can have. So we're touching on some information and we're encouraging some reflection about some tricky conversations. So we just want to take a moment, and we're going to play an audio for you. If you've called in, you might not actually hear the audio, so we've popped the message up on the screen so you can read along. So just take this moment to touch base on how you're feeling, regroup if you're in a group together, make sure everyone's feeling okay, and then we'll progress with the webinar shortly. So we'll just play that now. Thanks.
This is a message about taking care of yourself.
We are in this space to have conversations about early childhood and mental health and well-being.
We were all children once, and some of us are parents for children now. So when we yarn about mental health and well-being in early childhood, it can trigger some good memories, it can trigger difficult memories.
We've all had a range of experiences that make us who we are today. As you engage with Kids Matter materials, be aware of feelings that come up for you. If there are difficulties or difficult feelings, make sure that you talk to someone.
It doesn't help to leave it stuck and buried.
Talk it through with a friend, a family member, work colleague or your boss.
It is important sometimes to seek out professional support.
If we're confident in the process of seeking out professional support, we are able to show families this confidence when we support them to find extra help when they need it.
Take care of yourself. Have a yarn with someone who can help you when you experience difficult feelings.
Excellent. So I hope everyone's tracking along okay. We're going to move on to a poll now, which is still on the theme of self-care and taking care of ourselves. So today I'd like you to consider what you do to take care of yourself before, during or after having a tricky conversation. I'm just going to put the poll up now. And here we go. So take a moment to answer. Again, it might be more than one thing, or again, there could be other things that you'd like to tell us in the chat. Now, Michelle, while people are answering that, there was one question that I think you're going to touch on some of the answers shortly, but we have been asked I'll just find the question for you. How do we deal with parents who deny there is something wrong? Would you like to respond to that now, or should we just wait and see if we cover that base shortly?
Yeah, I think it's something that we do cover briefly, but it is something that is actually quite complex to answer. So I guess, the first thing is around the principles of your relationship with that parent, making sure you're being respectful and you're trying to build that relationship of trust so that, you can actually open up conversations with the family. There's no blanket rule of what you can do, but I think it's actually about sitting on reflecting, even maybe reflecting together as a staff if that's appropriate. What are the needs of the child? What is the time frame that we're thinking might be in the best interest of the child, and what is it that the family are feeling are in the best interest of the child? So, it's going to be a lot of give and take. It's going to be a lot of professional judgments and a lot of different opinions. But I really think it comes back to the relationship. and time, really like allowing families that time to grieve or to come to terms with it, clear communication, as we said, sometimes we might need to give some evidence, like things like, oh, well, in early childhood we look for these things early, and we know that this has good outcomes when we find these things early and are able to support. So there's a lot of things that we know as early childhood educators that we assume parents know, and there's a lot of things that parents know about their child that we don't necessarily see from their perspective either. So I think it's really important to say, I'm really sorry, but that's a very complex answer that, involves a lot of thought for the individual situation.
Definitely. And if I think as participating services, if you ever have the questions about ways to approach those things, it is about going back to the framework, potentially having a conversation, and it can be a completely de-identified conversation with your facilitator as well to help support some of the planning around those, because it is really about considering the situation and the child's behaviours within a context, because a parent might be completely right, correct in saying that it isn't necessarily something they want to or have capacity to respond to right now as well. So I'm going to stop the poll, and there's been lots of things going on in the chat. People have been adding some extra self-care tips, so anyone who hasn't been keeping up with the chat, go back there and you might find a few that you haven't done before, or you'd like to have a look. One thing that popped out for me was journal writing and walking along the beach. So lots of people have talked about being prepared and debriefing with an appropriate person. Also, that notion of maintaining professional boundaries has been a really, really big one, because that stems back to what you were saying earlier about we don't have to answer everything, neither should we answer everything or resolve everything. Sometimes it's about knowing when it's time to seek help. Definitely. So I'm going to have a little chat now too, because when we were talking about this poll question and having those tricky conversations, Michelle, we thought about what goes on, and there is a framework, a model, in fact, within Kids Matter called Stop, Reflect, Act model, and it can be useful in these kinds of situations where we're having tricky conversations. And this model assists us to support and truly support someone. It's a broad framework, and it can apply to all sorts of everyday interactions that we have. The first phase that popped up on the screen was the stop phase, where in this phase we pause and we listen to the person that we're speaking to, and that's an intention to actually stop any automatic responses that we sometimes do, because we do build the automatic responses up into our everyday interactions that we have with people, particularly because of the huge amount of information we get presented with every day, and automatic responses can be really good in some situations. However, they can be a problem if it means that we respond in a way that doesn't fully understand the situation. So this notion of stop it, at first thinking, sometimes it can be, oh yeah, that's really easy, but it can be a really difficult thing to just stop and stay in the moment and be mindful of where we're at and what we're thinking. The next stage is the reflect stage, and this is the time that we take to do a brief internal check and think about what the speaker that we're talking to is meaning, what they're doing, how they're feeling, all those things that help build up what our context is. But it's also to consider factors such as the timing and location that we're having the conversation in, how urgent it is, considering whether everyone's safe is a big thing too, to have in this really brief millisecond reflect time that actually does occur. And there's also the spot where we reflect about the scope of our role and the most appropriate ways that we can progress to help support someone, particularly when the tricky conversation is around help-seeking conversations. So it's important to take a moment and reflect about the situation and your next step. And then the act part of this phase is where we move our internal processing thoughts and feelings into action. And it's important to remember when we talk about action that it doesn't mean resolution. Sometimes it can just be the next step. it can be asking an open-ended question, it can be paraphrasing and reflecting back what someone had said to you. It can be a small act of caring, like some of the self-care things that people have been typing in the chat have been things like having a cup of tea. Sometimes it's about getting someone a cup of tea in a moment to just have some space. And this act could also be around suggesting another time or location, or deciding to involve someone else to help support the situation as well. So it's important to remember that throughout the course of a conversation there can be many cycles of the stop, reflect, act stages. And if anyone does want any more information about stop, reflect, act, it can be found in our component 3, working with parents and carers, online professional learning topics. And in the topic 3 of this particular component, there are videos demonstrating the model in action, but also resources with activities that can help you develop your use of the model further. Michelle, I'm going to hand back over to you, but can you think of any time or any tricky conversations in particular where the stop, reflect, act model could be really useful?
Yes, I can, Amelia. I think some of the trickiest conversations that educators may have with families are when there are child protection concerns. So all educators should have up-to-date training in regards to this. So we won't focus on this for very long because many of the strategies are given throughout that training. So there are 3 key elements that I think we should consider today.
Okay, I'll leave you to it then. See you soon.
Thanks. So sometimes the information that families share during the discussion can cause educators great distress and trigger big emotions. So it's vital that we take care of each other and ourselves in these situations. And debriefing is one way. In doing this, we need to maintain strict confidentiality. So discussing some information with inappropriate people can put court cases and lives at risk, as well as having the potential to have serious emotional hurt. And it's important to be familiar with your policies and the appropriate channels for staff to debrief and share what they need to. Some educators have access to free counselling sessions via the EAP scheme, and there's also phone counselling services or other options within your community. Now, some of our registered Kids Matter services have even chosen to make the supporting of staff wellbeing their main focus while participating in Kids Matter. And their goals and the resources that they access work towards an overall plan to open up greater conversations about mental health and wellbeing, and to support their staff working with many families who are vulnerable or in difficult circumstances. So if you'd like to use any of our resources in this way, then please feel free to contact your facilitator. Now, secondly, a child's wellbeing is paramount, and empathy is an important element in supporting the child and their family. Each of us might have times when it's more difficult to empathise because of what we were hearing, or what we've witnessed, or concerns for the child, or even our own personal experiences can come into play. So it's important to be aware of our feelings and understand that every circumstance is different, and also to remember that all human beings are capable of a range of behaviour given the right circumstances. So when you're concerned about how a child is being cared for, it's important to remember that some adults may have lacked opportunities, experiences, or environments necessary to support them in knowing and learning about the essential skills needed to care for, nurture and protect children. Shaming and judging someone in this situation is really unlikely to lead to the changes in the behaviour that needed to keep the child safe or to improve their wellbeing. It is most likely to put a barrier up between your relationship, and the family could close down communication with you completely. And this will not support a child's wellbeing. It might actually lead to the child no longer attending the service, with the result that being that the child's world becomes more disrupted and less people are being aware of and available to support the needs of their child and their family. So working within our own professional boundaries and remaining vigilant, curious, supportive and kind might be the most effective approach and the best protective factors that you can put in place. So another way to support protective connections with the community is to display flyers for local parenting groups, or even host a community-based parenting group at your centre. And finally, we need to consider ways of being positive role models for the other educators. If you have a tricky conversation that goes well, then share this information at a staff meeting without breaching confidentiality. Discuss what went well, what could have gone better, and what further steps you can do as a service to promote the effective communication with families. Or, if confidentiality is an issue, you could try role-playing different fictional examples and see if anyone's willing to share their own experience of being told difficult news by a professional. And this way, educators can get practice in a safe place to be using respectful, strengths-based language. And this will build up their confidence of the less experienced educators and help build a shared knowledge base. After all, families may choose to discuss issues with any educator, and handling this confidently is likely to bring about the best outcomes for the child and the family. So the another time that you may have concerns is concerns for a parent's well-being. Educators are told a wide range of circumstances that a family might face, and sometimes your concern will be with the parent or carer's mental well-being. You might have noticed something that they may not be aware of or noticed before, or you may have a parent with a diagnosed mental health condition and they've told you about it before and their mental health has now fluctuated. So what do we do when we have a concern? Well, again, it really does depend on a range of factors, but here are some general things to consider. Is the child's well-being or safety of concern? You may need to consult with your state's departments for guidance. Being or safety of concern? You may need to consult with your state's departments for guidance. Have you had a discussion about what's happening for the person before, or is it possible to open up a new conversation? For example, I've just noticed that you seem to have a little bit less energy lately. Is everything okay? And if the parent has told you before that they have a mental health condition, did they share what strategies they would like you to follow if their condition changes? Do you have information available to families to take and use privately if they don't feel like opening up to you about it? And is a phone call to one of the mental health hotlines beneficial in helping you to decide what is the best possible way to provide support? Beyond Blue have a hotline that operates 24 hours, 7 days a week, and they also have an online chat service that you can access to ask how you might best support a person. The person themselves may also choose to use this support. So the number is on your screen for Beyond Blue. But in an emergency, if you have immediate concern for a person's life, you may also choose to call the police. So sometimes seeking help can be very difficult, and sometimes arriving at the decision to seek help can be even harder. But we need to remember that there can be situations where your concern may not be a concern for a family, or there may even be times when family members approach us with concerns that we do not necessarily see. So when determining if there is cause for this concern, it's important to be guided by a child's context and not just our underlying understanding and values. It's probably a good idea to be aware of our own values so that we can see when they're influencing that as well. After all, mental health in early childhood is determined by the capacities of a young child within the context of their development, their family, their environment, and their culture. And families and educators may not see a child's development in the same context. So what is okay can vary greatly when we factor in different cultural and philosophical perspectives or understandings of their development. Families may have others' opinions influencing them. Common phrases that parents hear are things like, oh, it's just a phase, they'll grow out of it. And people cope with potentially difficult news in different ways. As we mentioned earlier, denial can be a normal stage of grief for families facing unknown challenges with their child. But relationships are paramount, and families may not feel that their relationship with you is one where they can discuss their child's vulnerabilities. So trusting collaborative relationships between families and educators can take time and take a level of trust and connection, and it honestly can fluctuate over time. Families may have also had unpleasant experiences with professionals or community services, and they might prefer to keep everything to themselves. And although things are improving, there can still be a lot of stigma attached to seeking help for mental health challenges. There are still people living today who were in a generation where people were institutionalised quite easily if they displayed symptoms of mental health challenges, or things such as depression. So by being a Kids Matter service, we can actually open up that conversation about mental health and challenge some of those stigmas that are still left over. And this slide just shows us 3 key things that we might want to remember.
Excellent. Thanks, Michelle. And we've got a list of things that you can do here around making seeking help easier in your place. And again, the Beatles chart can actually help you with all of that too. We're coming to the end of our session now, so just take a moment to have a look over those key points. At the end of the day, we do need to respect the family's right to choose, and that's something we really need to keep in mind, and about whether they need to seek help or what type of assistance is required. But if you do have any serious concerns about the risk to a child, it is important to follow pathways outlined within your child protection system in your state, which can also lead to positive outcomes for families. But it is around preserving the relationship, isn't it, Michelle? So I'm just, we've popped those things up on there, and there's also some further resources for people as well, for tools to have effective family meetings, which people can actually have at their access and available, and you'll be provided with a copy of these slides, so you'll have access to all these links as well. Do you have a final message at all, Michelle, that people can take away with them when they leave today?
Yeah, thanks, Amelia. I think that sharing information with families can range from straightforward to really complex. So there are many times that we get the privilege to walk alongside families in the hard places. And I think it's really important to keep reflecting on our own practice, to develop our skills, use the tools available to us. But one of our greatest tools might actually be very well just having a bucket of compassion and optimism for those facing difficult circumstances, and for ourselves when we need it, to walk alongside them and provide support. So.
Yes, definitely. And I think you've wrapped up every takeaway message. And I guess my takeaway message is around to really consider anything that we do within the context of how we feel about a situation. We need to keep check of our own values and our own assumptions, but also the context that children and families do live and survive in a lot of the time. So it is important to not rush off to make quick assumptions about certain things. So, which is why the Beatles chart is so fantastic. Now, there's been lots of questions in the chat about resources that we can use to support people. So, I'm making a call now over the next few weeks on Facebook. We'll share some really great resources. We've got some posters and things like that we can share so that help you get access to those things. Other than that, check out our website. There's a resources for educators and families menu item, and you get all sorts of great resources that you can use to start conversations with families about what mental health is. So everyone, take a moment to complete the exit survey at the end, and please continue the conversation on our blog via Facebook, or if you've got a question, email us and we'll get back to you on that. So thank you. You will be receiving a certificate within 5 days and access to the follow-up resources. So once again, thank you so much, Michelle. The information you've provided today has there's been lots for us to take away and reflect about, and just really highlights how complex it is to work collaboratively and how great the outcomes can be.
Yeah, thanks, Amelia.
Thanks a lot, Michelle. Thanks everyone for coming today, and hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Bye.
Have we been patched out? Hello.